A peasant, across an entire lifetime, might have owned a few tools, a pot, one set of clothes, and whatever furniture a family built by hand and used until it broke. That was not a spiritual choice. It was simply how little a person could afford to own. The average household today is sitting on $723 worth of things nobody uses, according to a recent national survey. 42 separate items on average, quietly doing nothing. And if you are living on a fixed income, that is not spare money sitting in a drawer somewhere. It is money that will never be replaced by next year's raise or bonus, because there isn't one coming. We assume more possessions mean more security, more of a cushion against whatever comes next. Past a certain point, the data says the opposite. Ownership without limit doesn't protect you, it quietly drains you, in ways that show up nowhere on a bank statement, until much later. Here is why peasants never faced this problem in the first place. Everything they owned had to be maintained, repaired, and used, because replacement simply wasn't available as an option. A broken tool got fixed, a worn piece of clothing got mended. That necessity put a natural ceiling on how much anyone could accumulate, without a single person ever deciding to live simply on purpose. Modern life inverted that entirely. Today, it is often cheaper to replace something than to repair it, and so replacing becomes the default, and accumulation becomes a reflex nobody examines. For a working-age household, this mistake is survivable because a future paycheck can absorb it, quietly, without much consequence. For a retiree on a fixed income, there is no future paycheck coming to absorb anything. Every dollar spent maintaining, storing, or replacing things you don't use is a dollar permanently gone from a nest egg that nobody is going to refill. Picture two retirees, same starting savings, same monthly income. One keeps a running habit of buying just-in-case items, a second coffee maker for guests who rarely visit, a closet of clothes for a size they used to be, subscriptions renewed automatically and rarely used. None of these, individually, feels like a real expense. The other applies a simple filter before any purchase or renewal. Will this actually get used, regularly, starting now? Over a single year, the difference might only be a few $100s over a 20 or 30-year retirement. Compounded the way any other steady leak compounds, it becomes a meaningfully different number sitting in an account, not because either retiree earned differently, but because one of them let small, invisible decisions accumulate unexamined for decades. You see, this isn't just a strategy for survival. It's the exact same framework used at the absolute top of modern wealth. Think about Warren Buffett. He is worth over $100 billion, yet he famously still lives in the exact same 5-bedroom house he bought in Omaha, Nebraska, back in 1958. He drives an older car, and he still spends less than $4 on his McDonald's breakfast every morning. People look at that and call it eccentric frugality, but they're missing the mechanism. Buffett and his late partner, Charlie Munger, operated on a strict psychological law, an inverse correlation between possessions and happiness. More houses, more things, more duplicate items just in case, don't add protection, they add complexity. They require half a day of your life to manage, to insure, to fix, or to replace, and to a billionaire, half a day of life is a price too high to pay. If the richest man on earth refuses to let useless objects steal his time and focus, why are we allowing 42 random items in our closets to quietly drain our fixed income? There is a real, documented link here worth taking seriously. Research on materialism and financial well-being has found a consistent connection between higher levels of possession-focused spending and both rising personal debt and declining overall well-being. This isn't a moral judgment about wanting nice things. It's a mechanical one. Every purchase made for a fleeting sense of security is a purchase that isn't going toward the actual thing that provides it. And after 50, there is a second cost sitting underneath the financial one that most people never connect to their belongings at all. Clutter is a documented physical hazard, not a cosmetic annoyance. A hallway that used to be walkable becomes a space to navigate around in low light. A staircase with stored items on it becomes a fall waiting to happen, especially in the early morning or the middle of the night, exactly when balance and alertness are at their lowest. A garage or a spare room packed floor to ceiling, becomes somewhere you simply stop going, which sounds harmless, until you consider what else that avoidance is quietly costing you, in movement and mobility. And a fall, at this stage of life, is not a minor inconvenience you shake off in a day, the way you might have at 30. It is very often the exact kind of event that triggers the long-term care costs this series has already covered. The private nursing home rooms running well over $100,000 a year. The things sitting in your closet or your garage aren't just costing you money quietly in the background. In some homes, they are actively working against your physical safety, at the very same time, compounding two risks that most people have never thought to connect to each other. Stay with me here, because this next part surprises most people. The instinct to hold onto things just in case feels like caution, like preparing for the future. The actual effect is closer to the opposite. Each unused item is one more thing to store, insure, dust, and eventually decide what to do with, and none of that effort is buying you any real protection against what actually threatens a retirement. More possessions were never peasants' path to security. Community and contribution were. Owning less wasn't their virtue. It was simply what necessity demanded. And it turns out that necessity was protecting them from something we now have to protect ourselves from, on purpose. There is a version of this bill that doesn't arrive until after you're gone, and it lands on someone you love instead of you. Most retirees eventually face some kind of downsizing, whether planned or forced by circumstance. A smaller home, a move to be near family, an assisted living transition that happens faster than anyone expected. When that day comes, every unused item becomes someone else's decision to make, usually an adult child, usually under real-time pressure, and often while they are also grieving or managing a difficult transition for you at the very same time. Unsorted possessions are one of the most common sources of quiet family conflict after a parent's move or passing. Not because anyone is being petty about it, but because nobody wants to be the one who decides what to keep from a lifetime of accumulated things, especially not in a single, stressful weekend, spent going through boxes in a house that's about to belong to someone else. Estate liquidation services exist specifically because this problem is common enough to support an entire industry, built around cleaning out homes full of decades of belongings, nobody sorted, while there was still time to do it calmly. Peasants never created this problem for their children. There was almost nothing left to sort through, no difficult weekend, no argument over what mattered and what didn't. So here is the actual prescription, and it is a single, specific test, not a lifestyle overhaul or a weekend project that takes over your whole house. For anything you're deciding whether to keep, ask the peasant's own question, translated forward: would I repair this if it broke, or would I just replace it? If the honest answer is that you'd simply replace it without a second thought, or that you can't actually remember the last time you used it at all, it has already quietly failed the only test that mattered to the people who couldn't afford to own things carelessly. This test works precisely because it removes the emotional weight most people attach to decluttering. It isn't asking whether an item sparks joy, or whether you might need it someday. Both questions that are easy to answer yes to, for almost anything. It is asking a narrower, more honest question about actual use. The same question a peasant would have asked without ever framing it as a question at all, simply because the alternative was starving or freezing. Pick one category this week, not your entire house, one category. A closet you haven't fully opened in months. A garage shelf you walk past without really seeing anymore. A drawer of subscriptions still being charged automatically that you couldn't name from memory if asked. Apply the test once, honestly, item by item, or charge by charge. What you free up doesn't have to disappear into nothing. Redirect it toward your savings, toward your investments, or simply toward one less decision your family will eventually have to make, without you there to ask what actually mattered to you. If this connected with you, send it to a parent or a sibling, still holding on to a house full of things nobody has looked at in years. That conversation is easier to start with a video than on your own. 3 videos into this series now, and a pattern is worth naming plainly. Peasants never had a purpose tracking app because survival built purpose in by default. They were never isolated by circumstance because shared labor made isolation structurally rare, and they never accumulated clutter because scarcity kept ownership within limits nobody had to enforce. None of these were virtues peasants chose. They were simply what necessity demanded, in 3 different areas of life, all at once, without anyone framing it as a lesson. Modern comfort removed all 3 constraints in a single generation, and each removal quietly created a cost retirement planning rarely accounts for: purpose, connection, and now, possessions. This is the 3rd video in this series, one habit at a time, looking at what peasant life protected people from by simple necessity, and what modern comfort quietly took away. Subscribe if you want the next one when it's ready.